The more I hear about abduction stories, particularly the ones that happen in bed at night when people are asleep, the more I can see the similarities between that and what's called sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis is surprisingly common. Something like 30% of people have it. When you're dreaming, you have to be paralyzed. But normally that wears off long before you ever wake up, so you don't know anything about it. But sometimes the mechanism goes wrong so that you wake up and you're still paralyzed. This paralysis is very often associated with buzzing and humming noises, feelings of floating or flying or being dragged away, creepy crawly skin sensations as though something's running up and down your skin, and overwhelming all of that, a sense of presence, the feeling that there's somebody there in the room with you. And when it wears off, you just, oh, phew. If you don't know what it is, it can be pretty frightening. Now, you can see the many similarities between that and alien abductions. I think a lot of alien abduction accounts are, in fact, elaborations of sleep paralysis.
But we know for a fact that not all of these abductees are sleeping, and they're having these experiences. Yes, there is sleep paralysis, and yes, if they're asleep, maybe part of that could be sleep paralysis. But when a person's sitting up in bed reading and a bright light floods their room and they become paralyzed and can't move and they feel something is in their room, how do you explain that? How do you explain people driving on the highway? They're not asleep and they're not always by themselves. So they're not making this up because they have witnesses.
This is inherently unbelievable. This is the fringe of the fringe. People are telling us that they're being abducted by aliens from another planet. This is prima facie evidence of mental instability and has been for many, many years. For the first 30 years, 20 years of this phenomenon, all we did was search for psychological and psychiatric reasons for why this could be happening. We've got to find the reasons for it because it's obviously psychological. It can't be happening the way people are describing it. Well, it's not psychological and it's not psychiatric, and it is happening, I think, by and large, the way people are describing it. And I think that what we're looking at here is a physiological program of exploitation by one species of another.
In December 1985, the writer Whitley Strieber experienced a terrifying alien abduction from his cabin in upstate New York. He wrote about his experience in a best-selling book, Communion, which was later turned into a major film.
Woke up aware of the fact that there was something terribly wrong, and when I opened my eyes, I saw these dreadful figures around me, little stocky figures that were dark blue, and a tall, willowy sort of a figure that had a big black eyes and a rather snout-like sort of narrow face. And I thought I was having a nightmare. I kept trying to wake up again, and I couldn't because I was already awake. I had, among other things, a needle stuck into the side of my head, and it made a flash behind my eyes, and it was absolutely terrifying. Then I blacked out.
One of the things that that abductees have described over the years are these sort of unusual staring procedures where an alien will come and stare directly into their eyes at a distance of a few inches or 1 inch or even touching forehead to forehead. And what is happening there is that the alien is sort of hooking into their optic nerve and using their optic nerve as a neural pathway. And by doing that, they can go all through their brain, stimulating or innervating any neural pathways that they want. And therefore, they can receive data. That is to say, they can look at an abductee's memories or what an abductee has been doing for the past few weeks or whatever. They can inject data if they wish. They can elicit emotional responses for whatever procedures they want to do. They can virtually control the person in any way they want.
Just what occurred up at the cabin remains a mystery. Strieber maintains that it was a real event and not a dream, and cites that over the following 4 years, 19 other people also reported seeing aliens at the same location.
Alien abduction experiences could be one form of what's called a metachoric experience. This is a particular kind of altered state of consciousness in which you think you're in the ordinary world, but in fact you've hallucinated everything. The most common example of this is the false awakening. That's where you dream that you've woken up. So you're dreaming, you dream you wake up, you perhaps get out of bed, clean your teeth, wander around, everything's perfectly normal. And then you see something isn't normal at all and you go, oh my God, I'm dreaming. And then you really wake up.
What's it like recounting the experience now after all these years?
It feels like it's happening again. It's as vivid as it was the day it happened. I'll never forget it for a second. It's burned into my brain. I remember it very well.
I've met Whitley Strieber on a number of occasions, and I am totally convinced that he's being entirely truthful about his experiences. He is undoubtedly someone who has undergone some quite extraordinary experience. Whether it's extraterrestrial or not, I don't know. I'm not sure that he would necessarily label it in that way. But it's alien, certainly in the sense that it's alien to our understanding. And I think that Whitley and people like him have clearly experienced something quite extraordinary.
I'd like to introduce Anne and Whitley. Whitley has had some...
The support group shown in the film Communion was based on a real abduction support group run by Bud Hopkins in New York City, which has met every week for the last 35 years.
One of the things that's always asked the abductees themselves, why me? Everybody says, why me? And there's no answer for that. We have no idea. The one thing we do know is that if someone has been having abduction experiences, which they will have throughout their life again and again, as if they're an involuntary specimen in somebody's long-term study, and that person then comes to maturity and produces children of his or her own, it's very likely that one or more of those children will also be abducted, as if the aliens are following a particular genetic line.
Every Friday evening, around 10 people come together in Hopkins' Midtown house to share their experiences. For many, it's a vital support mechanism in coping with the trauma.
I don't know what had happened, or why my head was going in the wrong direction on the bed, or why I still had my jeans on. It was kind of frightening. I was being shown something on a screen, and two little guys were leading me up to the screen, and little gray, the typical guys. And I realized, well, I need to wake up. I need to wake up really bad because I don't like this. And then when I woke up, I was paralyzed in my bed. I was in a fetal position, and my hands were locked like this.
I woke up paralyzed, and I could move my eyes, fused blue light.
I saw this light, and it was sort of like a very symmetrical, circular globe of some sort.
I had this gut feeling inside of me that I knew at that point that something or someone was in my room.
It was real, what was happening to me, and it was terrifying.
What I feel is going on at the heart of the abduction phenomena is that another intelligence from here, from another place, is forcibly interacting with human beings, I feel against their will, in a series of a priori, originally perhaps experiments, and now a series of procedures that suggest a very disturbing situation, namely that we're being mucked about with.
One of the most dramatic abduction cases that Hopkins investigated occurred in November 1989 in New York City.
Well, on November 30th, 1989, I went to sleep, and I felt this numbness crawling up from my toes, up to my legs, and I felt a presence in the room. And I was afraid to open my eyes, and I didn't for a while, but then I had to in order to protect my family and myself. And when I opened my eyes, there was this creature, this thing, standing at the foot of my bed. It had large black eyes. It was sort of gray, and it didn't belong there. I was terrified. I thought I was going to have a heart attack, to be quite honest with you. I thought I would go into heart failure. That's exactly how I felt.
Linda was put in touch with Bud Hopkins, who undertook a series of hypnotic regressions. These sessions unlocked many more bizarre details of the abduction. These sessions unlocked many more bizarre details of the abduction.
Well, I found myself outside the window, 12 stories up in midair, and I couldn't breathe. It was hard to breathe, and I felt as though my eyes were like stuck in their sockets. They wouldn't move, so all I could do was look straight ahead. I was bathed in a bluish-white light, sort of smoky. And that was all I saw. And then the next thing I remembered was I felt as though I was on an invisible elevator going up and into this craft. Then I was brought into this very clinical-looking room where I was undressed, and I sat on this table. And there might have been about 4 creatures there. And they began to examine me.
One of the things about this subject is if you see something dramatic or encounter it somewhere or other, maybe through reading or whatever, one of the things is that you instantly, if this is true, it's the biggest event in human history. If there is, in fact, some non-human intelligence in using some kind of non-human technology, suddenly interacting with us, it's the biggest event in human history. I can't imagine encountering this and not feeling dramatically moved and disposed to look into it.
According to those who investigated this abduction, there were multiple witnesses who actually saw a UFO hovering near her apartment building on the night.
I've met Linda, and she's a very level-headed woman, and this case is extraordinary because it has so many witnesses that that saw the craft hovering over her apartment building. when Bud shows the drawings from the different witnesses, it's astounding, and that's what we need to bring across to the public, is that these people aren't just abducted all by themselves in the middle of a field somewhere. This can happen anywhere.
I have looked into probably about 620 separate individuals, and I've done numerous sessions with some of those people. So in a number of those cases, I've worked through maybe 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, 10 abduction experiences. I've heard from another, well, perhaps 4,000 people by letter, telephone, face-to-face, descriptions that they were giving me, but I didn't have a chance to follow them up. But the numbers are extraordinary.
What people say is that they're taken up out of their room, whether they're on their couch or in their kitchen or wherever they are, and oftentimes they're floated directly through a closed window. And I've asked them, are you sure this window was, didn't you open it, or didn't they open it, or did it open by themselves? And the abductees are clear, no, it's absolutely closed. Now, if this were psychological, they would say, well, of course it was open. There would be no problem then. But they look up at me and they say, has anybody else ever reported that, floating through a closed window, not knowing that absolutely everybody reports that.
What would you think if it hadn't have happened to you, and you know, in this neighbourhood with the people you know, you'd been told that it happened to someone else? What would you have thought? What would your action be?
I probably would not have believed it. I'd be very skeptical. And I expect most people to feel that way about my case. But I know what happened to me.
One of the major issues that skeptics have with the validity of Linda Cortile's abduction experience, the whole phenomena in general, was the use of hypnosis to unlock her memory of the event.
Okay.
Critics argue that this allows for the manipulation of the victim, and in some cases, the actual creation of a whole abduction experience.
Critical stage at this moment. All we're trying to do is build a picture exactly around. Right, take a couple of deep breaths for me, that's all.
Imagine someone has had a deeply traumatic sleep paralysis experience. Imagine they woke up in the night, couldn't move, couldn't scream, felt creepy crawly fingers on them, had an awful sense there's somebody in the room, heard buzzing and humming noises, and then later on they woke up and it's all gone. What are they going to think? Now imagine that they go to a hypnotherapist who regresses them and says, you can remember, you're lying in bed, the buzzing noise is there, you can remember. Now we know that encourages fantasy, and they will fantasize. And they will probably fantasize about aliens, particularly if that particular hypnotherapist is known for doing alien abduction regressions. And so this fantasy, they'll know at the time it's a fantasy because you normally do in hypnosis, but it gradually works their way into its memory. And you've only got to do that a few times before your memory has become vivid and rich and absolutely convincing, and you are sure that you were abducted. And in fact, you weren't.
I'm inside a spaceship. The star charts all on the walls all the way around.
Hypnosis, of course, has been the whipping boy of the skeptics because it's used very frequently in this. Hypnosis can very, very easily be misused. If a very clever interrogator can lead somebody in normal conversation, which we know if you watch lawyers in action, but just in normal conversation, people can be led, seduced, changed, almost against their will, so that the whole story is different. Under hypnosis, it's even easier to do that.
Okay. I feel ashamed.
What are you ashamed of?
Being frightened.
That's a perfectly natural reaction to anything unusual, out of the ordinary.
I don't understand what's going on.
Now, what we know about the way normal memory works is that the more often you tell a story, the more you are inclined to remember the story you told rather than the original event. And at its most extreme, this can become what's called a false memory, where a memory can feel absolutely real, like a memory, and yet have been created by your own telling of the story.
we saw an object that we could not identify. It was just hovering in the sky. It was perfectly round, silver in color, and sometimes the sun would shine on it in such a way that it looked as if there was some blue on the object.
So our abductees
chart on that, and it says deception strongly indicated the probability of deception being greater than 0.99. So that's almost certain.
No doubt in your mind that she was trying to deceive us.
No doubt in my mind.
There's not even an element that she believes it, but it may not have happened to her.
No, if she believed it, it would show that she was telling the truth. But it shows here that she does not believe it, and she knows that this did not occur.
Certainly in some cases where individuals have reported full-blown abduction experience, independent witnesses who were present in the room with them at the time reported that physically they had not left the room. In other words, the entire experience was taking place inside their own heads. Now, if we know that that can happen in some cases, I think the burden of proof is then on those who are making the stronger claims that people really are being taken aboard flying saucers to show that that's not what's happening in all of the cases.
Whilst the vast majority of abduction reports come from the United States, it is in fact a worldwide phenomena, with thousands of cases being reported in the United Kingdom alone. The man who was responsible for investigating these reports on behalf of the UK government was Nick Pope.
Whilst it's true to say that other people within various governments have conducted official research into UFOs, which has mirrored the work that I did at the ministry, to the best of my knowledge, I am the only person in the world ever to have conducted official research and investigation into the alien abduction phenomenon. Some people said I was at the ministry, why are you wasting time looking into alien abductions? I said, as long as people report these experiences to me, I have a duty to take their claims seriously. Some of these people were phoning up in a great state of distress. What was I supposed to do? Hang up on them?
UFO. Another one.
One of his cases was Peter and Diane Shepherd, who saw a large, brightly lit UFO outside their house in the country.
There in front of us, across the road, the main road, were the most amazing lights in the sky to our left. There were a number of them, and they were actually coming from our left, crossing over the road, and then they were coming in front of us and going to the right.
This was a field length away, by the way. These lights were at treetop height. But around the red was like a halo effect of flashing, sparkling, brilliant white flashes were going off.
So there you go, you see it.
We were all stunned, obviously, by what we were seeing. I mean,
Yeah,
our reality was completely shattered. This was something that wasn't supposed to happen.
how can something, you know, how could this be? This is, I mean, it's a shattering experience. You can't believe it. I was excited, a little bit afraid, a little bit uneasy because of the size of this thing. It was awesome.
The basic experience itself, I wouldn't dispute, often did seem to that person to take place the way they describe it. The question is how we interpret what happened. Did they just have some kind of very rich and complex hallucination that's what was happening?
There you go, you see there's a reference point, blah blah blah. UFO, another one.
Another bizarre case was Anne and Paul Andrews, whose son, Jason, was repeatedly visited by a UFO throughout his childhood. On each occasion, their house would begin to shake wildly. A bright light would come through the doors and windows, and Jason would make his way to the front door and out into their garden. He would disappear for hours on end.
I mean, the initial reaction is absolute terror. You know, you sort of, you know, you're running around like a headless chicken. You know, you don't know whether to phone the police or what to do. You know, you're just sort of standing there, you know, just sort of screaming at each other. You know, the second reaction is anger, you know, real anger that, you know, this can happen. You know, why can you not do anything about it? It's like when Jason was younger. You know, he would come to us and say, you know, I hate them for taking me, but I hate you for not stopping them. You know, you feel very angry, you feel very frustrated, you know, and you also feel very, very upset that this is going on sort of in your own home, in your own house, supposed to protect your children and keep them safe. You can't do anything about it.
Some people have speculated that we're dealing, when we talk about the greys, with what humans one day evolve into. And it's been suggested that we're dealing with people from the future coming back through time to take genetic material, perhaps to revise the human race.
He told us that was what was happening to him. I mean, he told us for years that he was being taken away by little men, you know, and I mean, this is when he was sort of 4 or 5, you know, he was saying, well, these little men come into my room and they make me go away with them, you know. Of course we're saying, well, nobody can get in, you know, the doors are locked, you know, mummy and daddy are here to protect you, you know, all the usual thing that parents say. So, I mean, it was him that was insisting to us that this is what was going on.
Someone's taking my son away and showing him things and doing things to him. You know, I like to know why. And if I could, I'll stop it.
At the end of the day, my best assessment, and because this is a view I formed at the ministry, I guess you could call it an official assessment, is that yes, we are dealing with extraterrestrials, and yes, the alien abduction phenomenon is real in a sense.
So what is going on? Are thousands of people really being abducted against their will by aliens? Are sinister experiments being carried out on the human race in spacecraft? Perhaps the most unique take on the phenomena is from the British scientist Albert Budden, who spent years researching the idea that alien abductions aren't real physical events, but are severe mental reactions caused by exposure to high levels of electromagnetic energy. Interestingly, only a very small percentage of people are sensitive enough to be affected by phenomena, which causes the victim to produce vivid and entirely lifelike hallucinations.
All these abductees or experiencers are actually suffering from, they've developed a condition called electrical hypersensitivity, and this long word means that they are hypersensitive to the invisible electromagnetic energies in the environment, and they're living in something called a hotspot where the electromagnetic energies are higher than most places, near power lines, near a radio transmitter, over a crack in the earth, which is a geological fault which produces kinetic fields, near a transformer. There's a whole host of sources of electromagnetism in the environment, a local minicab office, a radio ham next door, a CB radio enthusiast a few yards away. All of these things will irradiate the house on a permanent basis.
According to Budden's research, the sensations reported by abductees mirror those of people who are affected by strong electromagnetic currents.
They have periods where they feel like there's somebody in the room with them, watching them, although they can't actually see anybody. This is called a sense of presence. Their sense of time will be distorted. This is called desynchronization, where they feel that time has gone by in a flash, or that time has been distorted, been drawn out. There's a whole host of signs and symptoms that they begin to suffer from after being exposed to these high levels of electromagnetism.
So are alien abductions real? Are people being beamed up into spaceships and subjected to bizarre experiments? Or is this all just some form of severe psychological disorder? The abductees themselves have no doubt that this is a real phenomena, and yet the hard physical evidence is very thin to almost non-existent. At the end of the day, this is a phenomena that seems to affect millions of people around the world, and until we find out the true cause, the abduction files will remain firmly open.
Another one.
The whole basic purpose seems to be that the UFO occupants reach some kind of evolutionary dead end. That's an assumption, but I think it's a fairly safe one. And that they need to revivify their own stock, so to speak, with something probably more primitive that we can offer them, that they seem to need. This seems to be for them, not for us. We have no idea where this program is going to end up, but many people have described seeing on ships and in experiences figures that seem to be a mix of human and alien characters.
In the end, my own impression is that the vast majority of alien abduction experiences are in fact sleep paralysis. That people have woken up paralyzed as from dreaming, but they're half awake, they can't move, they have all the classic symptoms of sleep paralysis: buzzing, humming, bright lights, the feeling of presence that there's somebody there, and their mind takes over and does the rest and clothes the whole thing in all the paraphernalia of us.
The biggest problem with alien abduction research at the moment is that, with the best will in the world, it's been carried out by a handful of dedicated amateurs. What we really need to take forward research into this important matter is the involvement of mainstream science and the involvement of governments. It's only these two bodies that really, I think, can take us now forward and perhaps achieve something.
Abduction is horrifying. Abduction is a nightmare. But the audience must know that these events are real. They're physical events that are happening to millions of people. And I would not be surprised if someone you know is an abductee, but they've never said it.